So, hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar entitled The Great ESG Reset. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the pressures that are currently being faced by sustainability practitioners, by the ESG community, and by organizations as they really try and address some of the pressing issues around sustainability, ESG, compliance, and risk. So we're going to be looking at, how this is affecting companies. But first, we're going to say a little bit more about myself and the organization that I work with. So I work with a company called IDLance. We're a flexible learning partner and we provide on-demand access to instructional design, learning support, and specialist talent. The way that we are structured is that we're a freelance network and we have over 2,000 education experts within our network globally. And we really act as a learning and development partner to the organizations that we work with, supporting them through every aspect of their educational needs. So really lovely to be working with IDLance. I've been with them for about 6 months now, and it's a fantastic organization supporting some really interesting companies. And Megan, we could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So a little bit about me. I came on as ESG partnerships lead. My background is in corporate sustainability. I was leading climate and sustainability at a tech company for around 4 years. So I'm pretty well versed in the sustainability landscape, what it means to enact sustainability measures at a company, how compliance and risk come into sustainability. And I've really been keeping my finger on the pulse around, developments in sustainability in the last few years, of which there's been lots. Obviously, it really depends on where you are in the world, the EU, the US, South Africa, perhaps where you're based, Alana, as well. Lots of companies will be faced with kind of different and quite complex challenges in relation to sustainability. But there are some overarching themes around compliance and around some of the reporting frameworks that companies will have to report to report their kind of sustainability risk profiles, their impact statements, these kinds of things. So we'll be digging into those a little bit more today. So really my work at IDLance is building out partnerships in the ESG space and also building sustainability training tools. So thinking about how can we create some really engaging resources that will help train employees around issues of sustainability and ESG. So the agenda for today, and this probably won't be an hour long just to save everybody the time, but we're going to be diving a little bit into some of the challenges that are currently being faced by sustainability professionals. So why lots of sustainability professionals are facing burnout, essentially. We're going to be looking at where corporate sustainability is heading, what's coming down the regulatory pipeline, because a lot of sustainability is, in fact, a kind of regulatory and compliance function within companies these days. And then we're going to be looking at where sustainability training is heading. So for those of you who might be interested in the learning and development side, in how can we create sustainability training tools, I'm going to be diving into a little bit about what kinds of resources would be useful for companies as they prepare on their sustainability journeys. We could go to the next slide, Meg. Thank you. Meg is my slide wizard at the moment. She's helping me change the slides. Thank you, Meg. But first, just to, I guess, set the tone a little bit with this fun or not so fun cartoon. I think sustainability professionals all around the world usually are people who are relatively interested in the environment, interested in the climate crisis. And unfortunately, at the moment, we have an administration, a very important administration in terms of kind of global leadership that is pressing the green button on coal mining at the moment, which seems to be completely the wrong thing in regards to addressing climate change. And I thought I'd just start with this cartoon. This is on the top there, you can see a little cartoon called Coley, which is an anthropomorphized piece of coal that they've put some googly eyes on and a big smile, essentially endearing people to the use of coal. And here we've got the Interior Secretary of the US, Doug Bergman, who is kind of posing with this cute little piece of coal, trying to encourage I guess, people to be more supportive of the fossil fuel. This is just representation, I guess, of, where sustainability is maybe going, or the general sentiment around environmentalism at the moment in some important places in the society and our economy. It's obviously not a great thing from a kind of climate change perspective. Fossil fuels are definitely not what we need to be focused on right now. But unfortunately, this kind of sets the tone for the challenges that are really being faced by sustainability professionals, amongst others. And I'll dig into them in the next slide. And just a kind of important piece of framing as well for this webinar is that, according to Oxford Brookes University, 62% of sustainability professionals are currently experiencing burnout, which is obviously not great. And there are significant pressures from various different sides that are really affecting sustainability professionals at the moment. So we'll go into them on the next slide, Meg. That'd be great. So to start off with, there's a lot of, I guess, regulatory overload and escalating compliance. Now, I mentioned earlier on that, if you're working in a sustainability function in an organization, a lot of what you're doing is essentially kind of internal compliance. Lots of companies, be it SMEs, larger companies, companies that are listed in stock exchanges, they have to report towards different frameworks, depending on the jurisdictions that they're active in. And if you're a sustainability practitioner at a company, a lot of what you're doing is essentially kind of box ticking, making sure that all of the regulations are being complied by. And there's a lot of, I guess, kind of paperwork and, detailed reporting work that goes on internally. And now that there are, I guess, shifting compliance and frameworks that are coming down the pipeline, the burden of this regulation is increasing for sustainability professionals. The second kind of key piece is that, with the current climate, I guess, lots of sustainability teams are actually being scaled down, or sustainability functions are being spread across different areas at companies. For example, within risk, procurement, legal teams now have to kind of deal with sustainability issues. So sustainability teams themselves often haven't really seen the resource growth, but unfortunately the scope has really expanded in terms of what they need to do. So they're under a lot of pressure because there just really aren't enough resources for the sustainability teams themselves, for the CSOs, chief sustainability officers, sustainability practitioners. So there's an increasing workload upon them. Influence without authority. I think this is quite an important one. So sustainability teams are really dependent on, I guess, risk teams, legal teams, procurement teams on the C-suite. And so often they can, be asking different colleagues in these different parts of the organization for data, for information, for their sustainability reports. And they might not necessarily have the authority over these other teams. So there's a lot of kind of internal bargaining that needs to happen for sustainability practitioners to gather the information that they need for their reporting. So really what we see is that, unfortunately, they don't have authority over these other areas of the business, but they really need to have influence. So there's quite a lot of kind of emotional weight involved in being a sustainability practitioner. Another key piece is the data side of things. So as a sustainability practitioner, really what you're doing is gathering as much data as possible from different parts of the organization, about the organization's operations, about the organization's supply chain, from third parties, from partners. And all of this data collection really requires very mature data systems. And often companies are faced with, immature data systems, or, Excel spreadsheets that are all kind of here, there, and nowhere at the same time. And really, there is a very kind of complex data accounting that needs to take place for sustainability reports to be made. And when you have a kind of data and systems immaturity, this can be extremely difficult. Another really important one is increased scrutiny. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lot more regulations coming down, a lot more pressure to comply to certain reporting frameworks. And with this increased pressure, there is far more scrutiny from the boards and from investors as to what companies are doing. So again, this adds to increased pressure for sustainability professionals. And then finally, this one is really related to that first image that I showed of Coley. There's the emotional weight of trying to address this very vast, complex problem, really caring about it, and then also operating with a system that fundamentally is can be quite flawed. You can be up against a lot of kind of internal roadblocks at organizations if the sentiment around environmentalism or sustainability isn't there. So there's a lot of kind of emotional and kind of moral weight that gets carried by sustainability professionals. So all of this is not a great concoction for making one's life easier within a company. So we'll go to the next slide, please, Meg. Thanks so much. Now, I think this is important to kind of dive into what's coming down the regulatory pipeline around sustainability. We've seen a very rapidly changing regulatory environment, a lot of it being led by the European Union. However, there are regulations internationally in the US, particularly in California, that are very important. And it's important to note that a lot of the European regulations have been postponed somewhat or scaled back in their scope. The European Union's Green Directive of a few years ago went very gung-ho on environmental regulation, on deforestation regulation, on greenwashing regulation. And then essentially what happened was there was a huge amount of political pushback. And in the most recent European omnibus, they actually scaled back a lot of the climate regulation because there was fear that they were not going to be as competitive and that it was going to make businesses less competitive compared to, let's say, American counterparts, where there is a far more relaxed regulatory environment when it comes to environmental sustainability. Having said that, there are still a lot of pressures, and despite the fact they have been scaled back, they're still coming into force. It's just going to take a few more years. So these regulations and frameworks that are coming down the pipeline are really important for sustainability professionals and for entire teams to prepare for them, because they will be in place anywhere between 2026 and 2029 for some of them, like the deforestation regulation. And it's important that companies start preparing for those now. Now, in terms of the companies that will be liable for some of these regulations, it's usually the larger companies at the beginning. So it will be companies with a certain amount of revenue. For example, American companies operating in Europe, it's if they earn over 150 million in revenue per year. So it's the larger companies, listed companies at the moment, but it will trickle down to SMEs and smaller companies. So not to go into the kind of weeds of these, because I could talk for hours about CSRD and the nitty gritty, and I shouldn't want to bore you. So if you would like to go into further detail about some of these, please absolutely do. Ultimately, I think it's a very good thing that we have these regulations, because they are really kind of setting a standard, a global standard for how to report. And really, companies have been reporting on environmental impact, on double materiality for some years. And really what the European Union has done with some of these regulations, like CSRD, the first one you see there, is it's just really tried to kind of streamline and regulate the existing reporting that's been going on and add kind of assurance. So just to kind of go down the list and give a kind of brief overview, the CSRD essentially standardizes and makes comparable and makes reliable and makes auditable the reporting that was already going on by a lot of organizations. So it applies for large EU companies, listed companies that are generating over 150 million in turnover per year. The CSDDD really relates to supply chain. So if we think about companies operating in Europe that have complex supply chains, the CSDDD looks at human rights within the supply chain, looks at environmental impact within the supply chain. So again, it's a lot of essentially data collection from upstream parties. So again, this one is extremely important. The EU Greens claims and the deforestation regulation are another one, which are really important. The EU Greens claims is essentially a greenwashing regulation. So it prevents companies from saying, hey, I've got an environmentally friendly product, which really is a breach of kind of consumer regulation as well, right? Because it's kind of, what's the word? Confusing the consumer, saying that something is environmentally friendly when it really isn't. So it's really trying to regulate what those green claims are on certain kind of marketing and communications coming out of businesses. The deforestation regulation, again, really limits companies within Europe that are trying to sell any products that could be related to deforestation. So we think about things like cocoa, we think about things like soy, beef coming from, parts of Brazil, for example. The deforestation regulation requires companies to add information and digitally tag products coming into the EU to ensure that they're not associated with deforestation. So again, quite an important regulation. We're not just looking at Europe, though, despite the fact that Europe is the main place where some of these more influential regulations are coming into force. California has been very kind of forward thinking around climate and sustainability. They have climate disclosure laws, the SB 253 and the SB 261. Again, these apply to larger companies within California, but they're no less important. Globally, we have the ISSB and global baseline standards. These really apply internationally. We see companies across the Middle East. We see companies across the Asian markets, the US, Great Britain, reporting with the ISSB. And then there's ongoing sustainable finance regulations. And I think it's really important to remember the financial community. So we're talking about insurance companies, banks, financial regulators, and a lot of those organizations will be reporting with the sustainable finance regulations. All right, Meg, we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. All right, so I guess with all of that in mind and with the kind of regulatory, the regulatory landscape in place, it's interesting to think about, what shifts we're going to see in 2026. I think one of the key ones is integration of sustainability into the core governance of companies. So I guess by the end of 2026, ESG is no longer really going to sit in a kind of siloed space in the periphery. The risks and opportunities of ESG will be part of board agendas, audit committee purviews, and enterprise risk frameworks. So sustainability is going to be governed with the same kind of rigor as finance, legal, and risk functions. And that means that sustainability practitioners really are going to need a fluency in governance, business fundamentals, and risk taxonomies. So I think this is a really important one in terms of thinking about how sustainability is going to move from, a few people within the company that need to understand how it works to a much broader spread of understanding of ESG and sustainability compliance. The second key shift is assurance and audit ready reporting. So one of the key aspects of the CSRD is assurance. And this is essentially when you get a third party to assure that the reporting that you're doing is accurate and that it's correct. We see this in financial risk. There are third parties who are assuring whether organizations' financial risk and financial reporting are correct. And this is going to be moving into the sustainability space, into the ESG data space. So companies that are providing ESG data to the European Union are going to have to be verified by third parties. So again, this adds another level of, I guess, complexity into the functions of a sustainability practitioner. Again, the third one, data infrastructure and digital tagging. This is a massive one. With, for example, the EU deforestation legislation, lots of that requires digital tagging of goods, and again, increased and more sophisticated data infrastructure that will support these kinds of operations. Cross-functional competence building is the fourth one. I've kind of mentioned this, but again, really thinking about how we can spread ESG and sustainability knowledge, not just from sustainability practitioners, but into, let's say, the C-suite of the company, and really bake sustainability into the operations of an organization, and really give employees within the C-suite, within procurement, within risk, within legal, the skills and the fluency that they need to speak about sustainability confidently. I was chatting with a company recently, and they were talking about how their salespeople, salespeople, depending on the organizations that you're working with, really need to be versed in some of these things. If companies are coming out and saying, we care about sustainability, environmentalism is one of our core kind of things that we believe as an organization, it's important that salespeople and that, partnerships people, front-facing, outward-facing employees can speak about it with a fluency. So we're really seeing this kind of cross-functional competence building across the organization. Risk and resilience is a really important one as well. I think this idea of kind of, I guess, business resilience, right? When we think about the climate risk, physical climate risk, so, changing weather patterns and the effects on supply chains that's going to have, that's all falls under climate risk. And I think that for organizations to really be resilient within the next 20 years, resilient to supply chain shocks, resilient to, social impact shocks across their supply chains, this is something that sustainability practitioners and everyone at an organization is really going to have to become familiar with and well versed in. Value chain accountability is the second to last one here. So again, we're thinking about scope 3. So we're thinking about the partners up the value chain. So if we are reporting to the EU deforestation law, excuse me, we're thinking about how can we move up the value chain? How can our partners be accountable? And how can we work with our partners both down the supply chain and up the supply chain to create the data infrastructure that we need to gather all of the information to report, essentially. So there's going to be a lot more accountability also at organizations, and a lot more scrutiny into what the operations are like up the value chain. If you've got a supplier who is providing you with raw materials, and there are, complex human rights issues associated with those materials, these kinds of things are going to be much more scrutinized. And that's because of CSRD and a lot of these regulations that have a much more kind of tighter and I guess, tighter understanding. They require tighter understanding of what's going on up and down the supply chain. And then a really important one is outcomes over narratives. I think that we're kind of past the stage of, oh, well, this is kind of the right thing to do. And we need to start tying sustainability to business outcomes. And I think because we have moved from a place where environmentalism is broadly accepted to a place where environmentalism and environmental benefits have become, unfortunately, quite a politicized thing. We really need to equip teams with the language to tie sustainability to core business outcomes, to core business resilience. So thinking about, right, if we implement the sustainability measure, what's the effect it's going to have on the bottom line? Like, how can we tie sustainability to core KPIs? And that's a really, really important one, because I think sustainability practitioners at the moment really need to tie what they're doing to business fundamentals. And that's a real kind of skills gap that exists at the moment. All right, Meg, we can go on to the next one, please. Fantastic. Right. So all of this, I guess, paints a picture of ESG 2.0. So really what we're looking at coming down the barrel of ESG, of the regulatory frameworks. And with all of that, there is a skills gap. So similar to what I was just talking about at the last point there, one of the key kind of skills gap that I see is how do we prepare sustainability practitioners to tie the work that they're doing to business fundamentals? So that's like essentially giving sustainability practitioners the tools that they need to understand, business fundamentals, really, the bottom line, how inputs and sustainability, operations are really affecting the bottom line in a good or a bad way. Data and reporting skills is a key one. Again, a lot of these reporting frameworks are data collection functions, and I think there's a really big kind of skills gap around how do we enable teams to report on these effectively and gather the data that they need. The third one here is ESG training for boards, investors, and C-suite. So really, I think ESG fundamentals, sustainability fundamentals, depending on the organization. Some companies might be really well versed in sustainability and in ESG. Other companies might be just starting the ESG journey. But I think it's important to have a broad understanding of ESG across different functions of the company. Regulatory and compliance knowledge, and then lastly, and importantly, soft skills, right? How do you gain internal buy-in at companies for sustainability measures? How do you, coordinate cross-functionally with various different teams that might be in completely different sides of the business to report on some of these metrics? And how do we essentially create the next generation of leaders who are really going to drive these kinds of things at businesses, despite it being a very difficult time for sustainability and a very difficult time for people who care about the environment? Like, how can we really create and nurture the next generation of kind of ESG leaders, essentially? And then we'll go to the last one, please, Meg. Great. So this is kind of my 2 cents, and I'll open it up to questions after the slide. But where I really see sustainability training heading, I've over the last couple of weeks, I've had some really fantastic conversations with CSOs, chief sustainability officers at some really important, interesting companies. And these are a distillation of those conversations, just some of the general reading that I've been doing around the kind of training that is required for sustainability practitioners, but also for other functions across the business. So the first one here is really cross-functional upskilling. And again, I kind of alluded to this on the last slide, but how do we give, finance teams, procurement teams, HR teams, operations teams, how do we equip them with ESG knowledge? And a lot of this is, off the shelf ESG 101 basics. And this will help organizations to essentially distribute ESG capability instead of overloading one team with all the roles and responsibilities. So I think a very kind of broad baseline of understanding of how ESG works, ESG fundamentals, how it's tied to businesses is really important. The second one here is role-specific competency, right? So like, obviously there's lots of different functions within a company, but if you're a salesperson versus a procurement person, you're going to have very different needs in regards to sustainability knowledge. Like, you're going to need to be able to, let's say if you're a salesperson, sell a product and be able to talk about sustainability in a certain way. Or if you're procurement, you need to understand, where certain things that you're procuring are coming from and what the impact that may have on scope 3 of your organization. So these are really kind of like role specific trainings. And this is slightly different from the first one there, which is cross-functional. These are very role specific, giving ESG fluency that is relevant to the decisions being made by that role. The third one here is blended learning and micromodules. Something that we really try and prize at IDLance is making learning and training fun, making it engaging, making it easy to access and easy to do, rather than these kind of much more kind of maybe long form courses. We do both, but I think really thinking about micromodules, thinking about how we can create kind of short virtual sessions as an effective way to deliver kind of targeted and just-in-time training without disrupting kind of daily operations, because obviously sustainability professionals are under a lot of pressure at the moment. Integration with regulatory and reporting standards. This is a really important one. So going back to that slide around the reporting standards, CSRD, ISSB, all of these terrible acronyms that really just the brain forgets about, but really, really important. It's like, how can we create tools and prepare sustainability teams around these specific regulatory frameworks that are coming down, and bearing in mind that they're coming down the pipeline, at least in the EU anyway, with the CSRD between 2026 and 2029. So really linking sustainability training to some of these regulatory and reporting standards. Digital and data literacy focus again is really important, and that was the piece around creating digital architectures and data collection functions, and how do we train sustainability practitioners and others at the company to tag some of the products, for example, to curate the data and to really analyze the data as well. Coming to the end now, I think one thing that's really obvious in this space is that it's moving very quickly. The sustainability standards they come into place and then they change within like a year. And I think what's really important is a continuous learning and reskilling around sustainability, because really what's going on is that the landscape changes so quickly. As we know at the moment, with everything that is going on in the world, so crazy. Things are changing very quickly for businesses, and I think for businesses to be able to stay up to date on like a quarterly basis, so that their teams can really stay competitive within a much more uncertain environment is really, really important. So continuous learning, kind of reskilling and upskilling is really a core focus of IDLance at the moment and our sustainability work. And then finally, outcome-oriented assessments and assurance preparedness. So again, thinking about creating sustainability training tools that are really, focused essentially on, the outcome. Like, training isn't just about knowledge. Organizations are moving towards assessing whether employees can act on ESG data, and preparing teams really for like audit readiness is really a training objective in itself. So how can we make sure that sustainability teams and that others within organizations are really focused on the actual outcomes of the sustainability, tying it to business fundamentals? So I guess in an era of kind of generic ESG training, the future really is a lot more targeted, a lot more cross-functional, data and regulation ready, and continuous and kind of outcome focused learning. So yeah, I mean, I guess sustainability training isn't really just about awareness anymore. It's really important that we build capable teams that can talk about it within the organization, that can gather the data, that can report to these frameworks in an effective way. So that's our take on where sustainability training is headed. So Meg, if you'd like to go next. And we have the Q&A. So I guess with all of that, I think just as a kind of final note, and then we'll dive into the Q&A in case anyone has any pressing questions. Just something that, as I've been working at IDLance and thinking about some of these, I think it's a really exciting time for the sustainability world, if not a scary one. And I think with the right kind of training, with the right tools, I think that we can really equip people to weather the storm and enhance business resilience. And just to kind of leave with the note of business resilience, I think resilience is really, really important in today's business environment. And I think resilience can only be achieved when employees are equipped with the right tools, equipped with the right knowledge that we need to address some of these issues, and not just around environmental risk or environmental reporting, but also around human rights, social aspects, governance aspects, supply chain risks, supply chain shocks, all of these things that unfortunately we are seeing at the moment because of the unsteady state of the world. So really what we're trying to do at IDLance is enhance business resilience through fantastic, engaging and fun learning tools. So with that, I will open it up to the Q&A. Really what companies kind of need is like a champion, an internal champion, right? So like if there's at least maybe one person at a company who is they don't need to be blue-haired raging environmentalist burning flags of Shell, but they can be just someone who is interested in the environment and cares about these things, and really finding that person kind of internally who is willing to push these things, I think is really important to shift the culture, because it really only takes one person, right? And I think if there is that kind of internal champion at an organization, they could maybe do a webinar, or they could maybe do like a, employee day out where they talk about these things, or they could be the one who is pushing kind of a general ESG training for staff. And even those kinds of things really, really help. So I think having an internal champion, and then I think the second thing is really kind of like knowing the language to choose and the audience you're talking to, right? So like not every company is going to be um, receptive to the word sustainability. Not every company is going to be receptive to even, environmental benefit or something like that. But can we reframe it to fit things? And I think this is where the term business resilience really works, because business resilience at a time of a lot of instability is actually a really, really important thing. And like, who doesn't want their businesses to be resilient, right? Like it means like protecting the longevity of your business. So I think if we can maybe reframe some of these things and not make it about the environment, not make it about sustainability, but talk about business resilience, talk about competitiveness, talk about linking sustainability to business outcomes. I think that's really, really important. And I think that's why the piece around training sustainability professionals in business fundamentals is really important. Like if a sustainability practitioner wanted to, implement a new product that had certain, sustainable products in it, like how is that really going to affect the bottom line of the business? And I think because a lot of these kind of more like, oh, well, we should just do this just because it's good. Like a lot of those things have gone out the window now. We really need to start linking um, the kind of business case for sustainability. So I think it's those two things. I think it's really having that internal champion and then equipping them with the language to use to get these things off the ground. If it's not, maybe politically okay to say sustainability or environmentalism. Who knows? Every company's different, right?